Yeah, I know. Asking everyone to kill themselves is pretty harsh. I don't say that lightly in any way though, I promise. It's for good reason, because if you don't do it now you may never have the chance later. I went into bioengineering for the sole purpose of helping to better the world. If there was some way that we could create sustainable agriculture in any weather, more bountiful crops, or hell, even a substitute for meat farming, I would be happy with my accomplishments. Unfortunately, I was young and naive when I thought all that, before I was hired for the job that probably damned us all. It was honestly too good to pass up thanks to all the loans I had from grad school. Military contractors in the biomedicine field said when they hired me on that they would cover my full tuition loan paid back after 1 year on the job. If you've paid for graduate school, you know that's one hell of a deal, especially if the company is also paying a six-figure salary on the higher end, with major clearance requirements. I'm not a dumbass, I know it was either that or back behind the goddamn gas station counter scanning cat food and condoms for idiots that shouldn't reproduce in the first place. Oh Jesus Christ, every realization I have just makes everything worse. So, government contractor, right? We worked in a surprisingly normal spot in the American Midwest, a pretty big skyscraper that housed the rest of the firm's businesses. Ours was deep underground though, highly secure thanks to the nature of our work. I won't lie, when I stepped in I was super worried I had signed up to work for the fucking umbrella corporation. Honestly, it would probably be better to have a zombie apocalypse than this unending nightmare we're about to experience. Short rundown: I was an associate researcher on this project, as well as the lead on lab tests. They were looking for the miracle drug, something that had a 100% cure rate for anything from cancer to dementia to the common cold. I was absolutely behind the goal of the project from the start. Meanwhile, our head scientist, an older woman named Deb, was incredibly stony about everything. Nothing seemed good enough for her. There was no excitement when we hit breakthroughs, just a constant, we need more progress, type attitude. We couldn't please her, even with cutting-edge science. Meanwhile, Sam was another associate, her specialty being in genetic engineering. Guards were able to intervene, getting to him before he could do any lasting harm to himself. Recovery for him was normal, though he did have a slight concussion. The treatment continued, with the concussion fading in a few days. The subject was kept on a full psych lockdown for the remainder of the test while he received psychological counseling. Eventually, though they took his request with a very reluctant and honestly uncaring attitude, it was approved. He would continue helping us with the test until the trial was completed, and then he would be allowed to choose execution if he wanted. The guy was distraught, obviously haunted by what he had done. Other test subjects were proceeding a lot the same, though one began to completely break down after a short time. According to him, we were injecting him with baby's blood, unlocking his satanic powers. Didn't feel bad for him considering he was executed for the massive amount of things found on hard drives in his house. While administering tests and treatments, we worked in pairs. If there was a subject in the room, there was always one of us paired with one of the 2 guards who worked down here with us. It was me on duty for treatments that day, and the subject was being relatively quiet for the most part. We went in with no issue. The subject was cuffed by the guard and I set up to administer the drug. Before I knew what was going on, he started ranting again, saying he was going to take down the cabal and help Christ reign, the typical terrorist bullshit these days. Except this time he didn't keep to ranting, instead leaning over and sinking his teeth into my arm. He wouldn't let go either, no matter how much the guard tried pulling his jaw open or I knocked him in the head. Eventually, he started drawing blood through my scrubs and coat, so the guard took his last resort. Drawing his pistol, he leveled it at the subject's forehead, moving me aside and pulling the trigger. I felt his grip on my arm loosen almost instantly as the gunshot ran through, spattering gray matter on the wall behind us. The others came running within moments, seeing the steady pooling of blood on the floor. The subject was terminated, a complete fucking waste of a trial. Can't say he didn't deserve it, but he could have followed through on the one good thing he did in his life and finished the tests. Imagine our surprise when we went to pick him up and take him to the incinerator and he still had a pulse. He was given a rudimentary order: blink twice if you want to die, once for no. As soon as he blinked twice, Deb injected him with a nerve agent that would cause total death within 5 minutes. After about 2 minutes he began to seize, body erratically jerking around the bed he was on. His mouth began foaming, loud moans of despair coming out as his eyes rolled back in his head. His pulse dropped but never flatlined, with brain activity still going the entire way through. Even after a second dose of the nerve agent, he only suffered immense pain, but was unable to die in a conventional form. I took it upon myself to be honest with the other subject, the one who promised an execution for his sins and service. He was distraught, of course, but went quiet after a few moments. We left him be, or at least attempted to, but before the guard in the room could react, the subject stole the gun straight from his holster. Holding the gun to his temple, the subject flipped the safety off and pulled the trigger, splattering more gore on the freshly painted wall. A look of horror filled his eyes before he started screaming, the pain of what he had done settling in. The gun never left his temple, and he pulled the trigger 3 more times before falling to the ground. He just lay there twitching, blood pouring from every hole on his face as his brain swirled inside with the lead. We set him up in the lab, pulse still faintly going and brain waves still giving off from what was left of his skull. In the process of checking him out, we went ahead and did scans on the other subject. Another shock ran through all of us. His brain was reforming, matter forming and splitting off from his other cells like a reverse cancer. Things became bleak after a few days, with the realization that it would only restore the parts involving life functions. They would have a pulse consciousness, full awareness of everything at every second, confirmed by asking the subject questions and receiving answers, but they could not die. It became too much. We almost felt like we owed it to these people to kill them after trying so hard to make a cure. There was one option we had left though, and it was worth a shot. The incinerator. I can still smell his flesh and hear his screams. We put the conspiracy subject in first, thinking it would probably be a little easier on us considering his past. When we set it off, the screams started immediately, the sounds of his limbs thrashing as nerves were burned off at the ends. We were waiting for the screaming to stop. Waiting for him to finally fucking die. The screaming kept going. None of us knew what to do. At some point, he must have finally lost consciousness or just become numb to the pain, but it took hours. When he finally stopped, we gave it a few minutes before shutting the flames off, pulling the cremation tray out with our fingers crossed that it worked. His charred, blackened body was lying on the tray, twitching every so often. He let out a rasping breath, crispy vocal cords sounding like sandpaper. His pulse still beating, brain activity was still at full capacity, and even with his brain almost melting to the point of soup in his brain, he was still conscious. I think we found a way to actually bond the human soul to a genetic code, leaving us trapped in these meat bags through the treatment. We tried other ways, even decapitation as a full-on last resort. A severed, burned head was still giving off brain waves, even after all of that. Any amount of pain could happen to the body, any amount of restriction and injury inflicted, but the soul of the person would stay, brain activity never ceasing. They were trapped in their own head, quite literally, even if the rest of them were destroyed. I couldn't deal with what we had wrought. The realization that saving lives had gone into unethical territory like this, with us damning a human to eternal life. Our only hope to die now was old age, and it didn't look like that was going to happen at this rate either. I finally broke down last week in the lab, seeing the near-vegetative body of the cancer patient and the still severed, gawking head of the other. A scalpel was on the table next to me, and I decided it was enough. When I went home that night, I made up my mind. Knew my anatomy, but went into the bathroom to use the mirror just to make sure I was accurate. The scalpel stung as it first cut into my neck, making my hand recoil, but I had to follow through. I swiped it across quickly, slitting my jugular vein and pouring blood into the sink. I didn't realize how much blood I had in me until I saw it on the counter, almost overflowing the sink before the drain could take it all. I choked, unable to breathe as my throat was more concerned with the vein that was slit. My breath caught, bleeding everywhere. The last thing I remembered was falling back into unconsciousness, though it wasn't a complete blackout. I kept having waking nightmares, on the floor in a sea of my own blood, unable to move as I lay face down, iron taste on my tongue. By the time I was able to get up, the cut had closed up, healing like a normal wound would. It was 3 days from when I tried, and all I got was waking up in a pool of my own coagulating blood. I don't know if we flew too close to the sun or maybe we were part of the experiment. At this time I believe the strain that caused the loss of death may have gone airborne in the lab, bypassing the injectable treatment method. I'm giving you this warning so you can do what I can't. It's only a matter of time until this is everywhere, considering we've been free to go in and out of the lab as we please. Find a way to die now, before you lose your chance forever.